Brian Shaffer, a 27-year-old medical student from Ohio State University, has gone missing.
Brian was last seen at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a bar in Columbus, Ohio.
The 27-year-old clearly caught on surveillance footage walking into a bar, but he's never seen leaving.
Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Alice and this is English with Alice B, where you can come to learn English in a clear and simple way without the stress. This is another episode of True Crime in Slow English. This is where I tell true crime stories in slow and clear English so you can enjoy whilst also practicing your listening skills and expanding on your vocabulary. Today's case is quite frustrating actually, and the reason that it's frustrating is that it has never been solved. This is a case that has no clear answer and has no clear end. This case is actually quite unsettling. If something is unsettling, it can cause anxiety, feelings of uncomfortableness, and it can feel quite disturbing. Today we are going to be talking about the case of Brian Shaffer, the man who vanished into thin air. To vanish into thin air is an expression that we use to say he disappeared into nothing. There is no explanation, there is no image, there is no clear idea. He simply disappeared. We are going to look at today's case and we are going to be focusing on two parts of grammar. Reported speech, which is what we use to report what other people have said, to talk about what witnesses or friends have said. And we are also going to look at past modals of deduction. Like I said, this is a case with no answers. This is a case with no clear explanation. So we don't know what happened. We have to guess. Here is today's vocabulary list. This is some of the words that I will be using that I think are important for you to understand. Feel free to pause and take screenshots, take notes if you want to. Remember, I do have a basic vocabulary list, which you can find here. This is a video with some basic vocabulary related to true crime. If you are someone who likes to listen to true crime podcasts, documentaries, and stories, I advise you to check this video out. This will help you understand anything that you watch in the future. So let's begin with today's case and let's talk English. To understand why this case is so strange, we have to take a look at Brian Shaffer. Who is he? Brian Shaffer was born in Pickerington in Ohio in 1979 to parents Randy and Renee Shaffer. Brian also had a brother, Derek, who was 2 years younger than him. Family and close friends of the Shaffer family have said that they were a tight-knit family. If you are described as being tight-knit, it means you are close, like fabrics being knitted tightly together. It's a very positive way to talk about family, friends, a community. Brian, by all accounts, had a relatively normal upbringing. He and his brother practiced sports, played musical instruments, went to school together. Brian was described as kind, generous, and intelligent. In fact, he went on to study medicine at Ohio State University. His teachers said that he was smart and that he was hardworking. They all agreed that Brian had a very bright future in medicine. Although his future in medicine looked promising, Brian's real passion was for music. He played guitar, and his friends said that he often expressed a desire to live a laid-back, chill life on a beach somewhere, working at a bar, playing music, making records, that type of lifestyle. This is something that was inspired by his love for Jimmy Buffett. According to Brian's MySpace, he was just studying medicine to make sure that he had a reliable, secure job in the future. He wanted some security. His real dream was to form a band, make music, and make records. He had a girlfriend, Alexis, who he had met while he was studying medicine at Ohio State University. The couple seemed very much in love, very committed to each other, And in fact, they were planning to go on a trip to Miami together on April the 3rd, 2006. Many of his friends believed that Brian was actually intending to propose to Alexis during this trip. So this was a young, very intelligent couple. It seemed that they had a very bright future ahead of them together as a unit. Everything seems promising, right? Here we have a young man, very good looking man, studying medicine, described as intelligent and hardworking, someone who looks like he has a very bright future as a doctor, who also loves playing music. He's in a relationship, what seems to be a very healthy and happy relationship. This is usually the part of the story when things start to go wrong, right? Brian's life, in fact, was not perfect. In March 2006, Brian's mother, Renee Shaffer, unfortunately passed away from a very rare form of cancer. This was a terrible blow for Brian and for his family. Remember, I said how close they had been. Brian's friends said that although he was pretending to keep it together, so he was pretending to be okay, he was faking being okay, the truth is that he was struggling. They said that Brian had been very close with his mother and that when she died, it changed him. In this period, Brian was finishing his final exams and he was preparing for spring break. For those of you who don't know, spring break is that big holiday season in America where university and college students, and I think high school students, they finish their exams and they have the vacation at springtime. It's very typical that they party, they drink. It's usually a big celebration for Americans. Brian said that he was looking forward to this break. Of course, he had this trip planned with Alexis to go to Miami. He said that when he finished his final exams, he just wanted to go out and celebrate, forget his sadness, forget this grief and this pain that he was feeling for a night, and just blow off some steam. To blow off some steam means to relax a little bit by drinking and dancing and partying, or it can be a sport, something that you do that helps you relax after a period of stress and work. So it was Friday, the 31st of March. Brian has just finished his last exams and he wants to go out. He agreed to meet up with some friends, William Florence, who everyone called Clint, and so we will call Clint, and another friend, Meredith Reed, who actually joined them a little bit later. At the beginning, it was just Clint and Brian. They started at a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloon. Now, pay attention. This is where the story really begins. This is when we start to listen to the stories of the witnesses and their statements. According to Clint, he and Brian had met up on the Friday night after Brian had had dinner with his father. His father said that he was surprised Brian even agreed to go out, that he looked so tired, it didn't really make sense to him. But Brian insisted he wanted to go out, forget about his troubles, just have a few drinks with his friends. The plan for Clint and Brian was to do a bar hop, or in British English, a bar crawl. A bar crawl or a bar hop is when you pick a small area, maybe even a long street, and you hop from one bar to the next, to the next. After a few hours of drinking and bar crawling, Meredith joined them, and she drove them all back to the Ugly Tuna Saloon. They went inside the bar, and this is where they continued drinking. Brian was seen on CCTV footage entering with his friends. Brian called Alexis at around 10 p.m., and she told authorities that this was a relatively normal call. He had had a little bit to drink, but he was telling her that he loved her, and he told her that he couldn't wait for their trip on the following Monday, their trip to Miami. She didn't know, but this would be the last time that Alexis would hear from Brian. The night continues, the trio continue drinking. Brian was described as a very sociable character, especially in a bar, and especially if he had consumed alcohol. He was very happy to kind of mix and mingle and talk to other people in the bar. In fact, Brian is seen again on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloon talking to two girls. They are together having some kind of conversation, and then they turn around to go back inside the bar. This is at about 1:55 a.m. Clint says that he had lost track of Brian at around 2 a.m., but that this was relatively normal from Brian. He would mix, he would socialize, he would talk to other people, and sometimes he would even have enough of the night and he would take himself home without really saying anything to anyone. This sounds dangerous, but it's actually really common, not just for Brian, but in general. I know people who do this. They're drinking, they've had enough of the night, they don't want to say goodbye to people, so they just kind of leave quietly without informing anyone. Clint and Meredith said that Brian had done this before, so they weren't so alarmed when they lost track of him. The bar actually closed shortly after 2 a.m., and Clint and Meredith decided to wait outside to see if Brian would eventually come out as people were being asked to leave. But he never did. Clint and Meredith didn't find Brian and they couldn't find him anywhere. So they just assumed he had done the usual quiet exit, had gone home without telling anyone, and that they would just simply hear from him the next day. So they waited a little and then they themselves went home. The next day, of course, Alexis couldn't get hold of Brian. She knew he had been out drinking and just assumed that maybe he was hungover on someone's sofa somewhere. Perhaps he was still with Clint. So she contacted Clint. She asked him if he knew where Brian was, if he had heard from him, if he had seen him. Of course, the answer was no. He hadn't seen him since 2 o'clock that morning. Alexis, of course, contacted Brian's family, his father and his brother, and they had the same story to tell. They hadn't heard from or seen Brian since the night before. So Alexis was a little bit worried, but at that time in 2006, the culture that we had with phones was a little bit different. Someone perhaps wouldn't have been expected to be on their phone all the time, on social media, on Facebook Messenger, on Instagram, on WhatsApp. If you didn't hear from someone, and if you didn't hear from someone all day, as annoying as it could be, it wasn't really a reason to go into panic immediately. So Alexis was feeling worried, and of course, Brian's family started to feel a little bit worried, but there's nothing too urgent yet. And in fact, they decide not to call the police. They believe or they hope that Brian will appear somewhere. Of course, Brian was still dealing with grief. It was expected that his behavior was maybe going to be a little bit irrational. Maybe he would have gone to a friend who they hadn't heard of, or he may have just wanted some time alone. The real panic arrived when Brian didn't show up at the airport for their trip to Miami. Remember, he and Alexis had a trip booked on April the 3rd to go to Miami together. This was actually a gift from Brian's mother as well, so he wouldn't have missed this flight. He wouldn't have missed this trip. So when he didn't arrive at the airport, that's when his girlfriend Alexis really starts to worry. She understands now that something is wrong. And in fact, after this, she contacts the police to file a missing persons report. After Alexis, and of course then after his father as well, report to the police that Brian is missing, the Columbus police immediately begin their search. Investigators said that they had checked every inch of the bar to see if Brian had passed out somewhere in the toilets, was unconscious in some corner somewhere, was hiding under coats. There was no trace of Brian inside the bar whatsoever. So to understand this impossible exit, the investigators also reviewed all the CCTV footage, and they can see the moment at which Brian entered the bar, but they cannot see the moment at which he left. This footage was reviewed over and over again. They did a head count. In fact, the police also talked to witnesses. They talked to everybody who was in the bar that night that reported the same thing. They had not noticed or they had not seen Brian leave. The police were actually so confused as to how Brian was able to leave without being seen on any camera that they did a practice test themselves. They tried over 60 times to leave the bar in different ways and different styles and not be seen by cameras. But it was impossible. There was no blind spot that they noticed from the cameras. If Brian had left the bar, it's really difficult to understand how he couldn't have been seen on a camera somewhere. The investigation, of course, then expanded across the city. The police asked to see the CCTV footage of other bars in the area, other shops, other local businesses, to see if anyone had caught Brian walking past them that night. they found nothing. The women who were seen talking to Brian outside of the bar were also interviewed. They said they didn't really know much. They had met Brian that night. He didn't tell them anything about where he was going or if he was planning to leave. They told investigators that they had only had a brief conversation with Brian and they didn't really know anything else. The search became even more desperate, and eventually the police started to look in the nearby river, the Olentangy River. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. But of course, they found nothing. The search went on. Days turned into weeks turned into months. There was no trace, there was no sign. Nobody had any idea or reasonable explanation as to what happened to Brian that night. So Brian's family, his father and his brother, were desperate. Only a few weeks before, they had lost their mother, and now Brian is missing. Alexis, his girlfriend, was desperate, as you can imagine, desperate for answers, desperate to find out what had happened. She started calling Brian's phone every single day. And every time it went straight to voicemail. It seems that on the night of his disappearance, Brian's phone had been turned off. But still, Alexis called every day, sometimes several times a day, and every time it went to voicemail. Every time except one. A few months later, in September 2006, Alexis, as she was in the habit now, called Brian's phone again, and this time it didn't go straight to voicemail. This time, it actually started to ring. Alexis was amazed by this. She was hopeful again. This means that his phone had been turned on. In fact, she commented on her MySpace that this was the best sound she had ever heard. It gave her some hope. Someone, maybe even Brian, someone was out there and someone had Brian's phone and they had turned it on. Of course, Alexis reported this immediately to the police. They traced the call. They found the cell tower that the phone had pinged off, so that the phone had got reception from to receive a call. And they found that this call had been received just a few miles away, still in Ohio. This, of course, then triggered a search in that area, but then nothing was found. Nothing came from this search. Nothing came from this phone. And in fact, a few months later, the phone company said that this was probably a glitch. A glitch is a technical problem, sometimes unexplainable problem that happens sometimes with your phone, with your computer, with the TV, where just for a temporary moment, something doesn't work as expected. So it has been 20 years since Brian's disappearance, and we are as clueless today as we were then. There is no trace, no sign, no evidence as to what ended up happening to Brian that night. It seems that on April the 1st, 2006, Brian Shaffer just vanished into thin air. Of course, when you have a case this mysterious with no clear answers, this creepy, the internet piled on. This case blew up. It went viral. It became so interesting for many different reasons. And there are thousands of theories as to what could have happened to Brian Shaffer that night. We have to remember these are just theories. This is a case with no clear explanation, with no body, with no evidence, no nothing. So these are just ideas. These are just theories about what could have happened that night. So let's get into some of those main theories. Remember, because the police found no physical evidence, we don't know for sure what happened. This is where we have to use might have, must have, and could have. We don't know what happened, so we're just expressing what we think happened. So theory number one is the construction exit. At the back of the bar, so at the back of the Ugly Tuna Saloona, there was a service exit. This was an exit reserved just for staff, so just for people who worked at the bar. At the time, the bar was actually under construction. So this area was actually closed off and was not supposed to be accessed by just members of the public. It was supposed to be only people who were working on that construction site. It has been said that there was no security camera right on that exit, so that Brian, when he decided he'd had enough of the night, could have slipped out the back, gone through that exit, and made his way through the construction site and left. The problem with this theory is that Brian wasn't seen again on any other security footage. If he had successfully avoided the camera that was in the bar, and if there was no reliable camera at that exit, why wasn't he seen by another camera on the street, another camera by another bar, or another camera at another shop when he left? If he had avoided that one, why then was he still able to avoid other cameras on the street? But this construction site was a mess. And when the police took a look at it, they said this would have been difficult for anybody to walk through sober. Never mind when you're drunk. This would have been dangerous. Brian can't have tried to go through this exit because he would have fallen, he would have been injured, and then they would have found him the next day. There is more to this theory, with people suggesting that this is the exit that he took and that he must have had an accident, fell and hurt himself. The problem with this theory is that no body was ever found. Theory number 2 is that he never left the building. This theory is a lot darker. Since the cameras never showed him leaving, some people say that, well, he can't have left the bar at all. This theory suggests that Brian must have had an accident while he was inside the building, and that there was some kind of cover-up by the bar staff. Perhaps he fell into a hidden shaft, or perhaps he injured himself on the construction site, and then the bar staff, perhaps panicking for their jobs, perhaps panicking for their liability, did what they could to hide the evidence, to hide Brian's body. Maybe he became trapped in a wall of the construction. I find this theory to be quite ridiculous, to be honest. If a man in any bar has an accident and is severely injured or even loses his life, why would the bar staff try to hide this? If he was drunk, if it's clear that they didn't do anything, what would be the benefit in hiding this? Also, police dogs actually searched the building. If Brian was still somewhere inside, he would have been found. And theory number 3 is that this was a planned disappearance. This final theory suggests that Brian actually wanted to leave his life behind. He was suffering, of course, after the death of his mother. He was studying medicine, but that wasn't really his passion. If you remember, his friends had said that his real dream was to end up on a beach somewhere, someday, just playing music, living a low-key life. This theory suggests that he might have planned his own disappearance, but couldn't face telling his family and his friends and his girlfriend. This theory starts to become a little bit more complicated, and other parts of this theory online say that he must have taken a bag of different clothes into the bar with him and he changed, and this is how he might have avoided being seen on camera. There is a huge hole in this theory in that Brian was not seen entering the bar with a bag at all. His friends didn't see him holding anything that could have carried fresh clothes. So this one is a little bit hard to believe. Also, his brother Derek, when he heard this theory, said that this was not possible, that Brian wouldn't have done this to his family. Brian was free to leave and to go and live whatever life he wanted, but that he wouldn't have just left without saying anything to his father, to his brother, to his girlfriend. So this can't have happened. All these theories have problems with them. They don't answer the how and they don't answer the why. For me, it's entirely possible that Brian could have left the bar without being seen on camera. That part isn't the problem. The part that I have a problem with is, okay, he may have avoided the security cameras from this bar, but how is it that no other security camera on the street or in that area found him? And finally, we have to talk about Clint again. Remember, this was the friend that Brian had met that night. This isn't exactly a fourth theory. This doesn't go anywhere, but it did raise some suspicion. So at first, Clint was very cooperative with the police. He was very happy to give detailed information about, their night and what had happened and what Brian had said and how he was feeling. But when the police asked him to do a polygraph test, so a lie detector test, Clint refused. He hired a lawyer. And at this point, he actually stopped cooperating with the police. He stopped speaking to them. Clint said that he would not take a polygraph test because he had already given all the information that he knew to the police, and he hasn't talked to investigators since that day. This, of course, doesn't prove anything. This doesn't prove that Clint had anything to do with Brian's disappearance, but it is suspicious behavior. Him refusing to even do a lie detector test isn't an indication of his guilt at all. Polygraph tests are famously unreliable, and often they can have false flags. So often they can tell you that someone is lying when they aren't. It is entirely likely that Clint was advised not to take a polygraph test. I don't think that this means Clint did anything to Brian. I think he was being very protective of himself. And who knows, perhaps they were engaging in something that night. They were drinking a lot. Perhaps they were talking to girls. Perhaps they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing. Nothing illegal, but something that Clint perhaps didn't want coming back to him. There's so many reasons that he could have refused to speak. I don't think he had anything to do with it, because how would he have hidden a body? How would he have gotten Brian out of the club anyway without seeing him? So as weird and as suspicious as his behavior might be, I don't really think that anything happened between him and Brian. The tragedy for the Shaffer family did not just end with Brian's disappearance. 2 years later, in September 2008, Brian's father was involved in a freak accident. So a freak accident is an accidental death or an accidental injury caused by something that was completely unexpected, unlikely, and isn't usual. A heavy tree branch was blown down during a storm, and Brian's father was outside, and unfortunately, this branch landed on him, killing him. This adds just another layer of sadness to this case. Randy, of course, died never knowing what happened to his son. Derek, Brian's brother, in the space of 3 years, lost his mother, was dealing with Brian's disappearance, and then had lost his father. In such a short amount of time, Derek lost everybody. The story takes a chilling turn. The death of Randy, so the death of Brian's father was, obviously, it was in the news, it was spoken about, it was on social media, and there was a Facebook post about his death. An anonymous user posted a comment on the Facebook announcement of his death saying, "Dad, I love you, love, Brian." This sparked a massive wave of hope. It sparked curiosity. Obviously, everybody was talking about it. Here is this comment potentially from Brian, the son that they were looking for the past 2 years. And he's just here commenting on a post on Facebook. The comment had a location on it. The location was the US Virgin Islands, which again kind of supported, if we can say, this theory that Brian had voluntarily disappeared and had ended up on an island somewhere, on a beach somewhere. However, investigators later reported that they had tracked the comment, they had tracked the location, and that this comment was probably left by someone just making a bad joke, just trying to, I don't know, take advantage or mock the family of Brian. They concluded that this was almost certainly a cruel hoax, but for a brief moment, it made the world believe that Brian might still be alive. So that is all the information I have on this case. Of course, it has no clear explanation. It has no clear ending. We will probably never know what happened to Brian Shaffer on the night of April the 1st, 2006. This case is, like I said before, it's unsettling. It's really uncomfortable not knowing what happened to someone. I cannot imagine the pain of his family. There's no closure. There's no reasonable explanation. There's no way you can close this chapter and move forward. Alexis suffered a lot. She did eventually move on. She graduated, and she is now a doctor, and she is married with kids. She has a new life of her own, but she will never know. Potentially, she will never know what happened to Brian. My heart absolutely aches for Derek, his brother, who, as we said, in a very short period of time, lost everybody. What was this strong, close family of 4 is now just one person on his own. dealing with grief at a level that I imagine is indescribable. But at least with his parents, he has some kind of closure. When someone dies, you go through grief and you go through this horrible period, but there is some closure. You know how the story ended. With Brian, there's no clear explanation. There's no clear ending. This is a type of grief that I've never experienced before, that I think is rare to experience, but that I imagine is crippling. I imagine this to be the worst type of grief. So, guys, let me know what you think. Did you know this story before? Are there any theories that you agree with, or any new theories that you want to put in the comments below? Let me know what you think. Try to use some of that grammar that we've looked at today, the past modals of deduction. What might have happened? What must have happened? What can't have happened? Try to use reported speech as well. Have I missed anything from this story? Is there something else that his friend Clint said, or that the police said, or that Alexis told us? Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, and I will see you next time. Bye.